Hello. So I got some more information, another nugget from a QHHT session, and I wanted to share because, as usual, I thought it was really cool and really just helped reiterate the the importance of timing. So that's actually what the topic is, what the lesson is. And for those of you who don't know, QHHT is quantum healing hypnosis technique. And it's really just a technique that helps us get information from other lifetimes, sometimes this lifetime, but other lifetimes, and gives us access to our higher self or our subconscious, kind of whatever terminology you want to use. It's that most expanded version of us that has the answers that we're looking for. So, in my most recent session, I had a client where I was actually doing a redo, and I'll explain kind of how that even came to be. So, we met in December, and when we scheduled the appointment, I tapped into it and it felt okay. And I just said, okay, let's have the session at, this day and time. So the person comes over and, we talk, we go through all of the steps. And it was an amazing session. Like the past life was so cool, and all of their all of their questions were answered, and it was just a really cool experience, at least for me as the facilitator. So per usual, I was preparing the audio recording so I could send it to my client, and there was no sound. It was literally 2 hours of silence on the recording, and I was so upset, so upset, because it was such a cool session. And I thought, well, what did I do wrong? Like I started asking kind of all of the questions. What did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? Do I energetically need to work on something? Does the person need to energetically work on something? Like, what would cause such a thing to happen? So eventually, after beating myself up, I landed on it simply wasn't the right time. And I've had technical things happen before where it wasn't the right time for a session, and people couldn't get into Zoom, or people got into Zoom but yet the sound didn't work, which is what happened. So many things have happened before, and it never dawned on me that it was the timing until it dawned on me. So I emailed the client, profusely apologized, and then said, let's meet again when your schedule allows. So weeks and weeks go by, but we eventually agree on a day and time for them to come back over and redo the kind of past life and higher self portion of the session. So they came over, everything was fine, and one of the things that they were shown was from this present lifetime, which, like I said, sometimes it happens. Your subconscious takes you wherever you need to go for information. So when we got to the portion where we asked the higher self questions, I asked, well, why show this portion of this person's life, and what's the significance of that? And the reason for showing that was saying it was an example of something that the person wanted, but it wasn't the right time for them to have it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's a little bit of a theme that's starting to show up. And it was something kind of from their childhood that they wanted something desperately bad, but it simply wasn't the right time for it to happen. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. It made sense to me, because I've thought of so many things where I wanted something to happen, and I forced actions to happen, and they either didn't work out or something just completely fell through. So I understand the importance of timing and our readiness and how that plays in our ability to receive what we're ultimately supposed to receive. So for them, it was about timing in this one particular instance with the scene that they were shown. And like I said, the thing has since come to fruition. It was better than they had expected it to be, and it was way more than they could have received when they originally wanted it when they were a child. So from that perspective, it all worked out. So of course, I had to ask at the very end if the higher self would allow me to ask about the timing of the session. And they allowed me to ask the question, and I said, well, why were there technical difficulties in the previous session? And they said, time. It was simply just those 4 letters, time. That was the answer. And I said, okay, I understand that, and I thank you for your response. So it really got me to think about how we want certain things to happen in our lives in a certain order, in a certain time, and it just isn't meant to be written like that. It just isn't meant to happen. Sometimes we need skills, sometimes we need to have certain experiences. Sometimes the thing that we really want isn't actually the best thing for us. And it just takes certain time and experiences and connections and people and learning or unlearning to be able to get to the place where we can experience and receive what we're supposed to. And like I said, I've reflected on so many times where I tried to force certain things into place. And I'm extremely grateful for the things that didn't work out, because oftentimes I really wasn't ready. And I also couldn't have imagined things to be as good as they turned out to be in my original forcing and intention. So this served as a really good reminder for me as, someone who works in the energy space and someone who works with people, but also has my own dreams and desires and goals, that timing really is everything. If something is meant to happen, it's going to happen, but we can't force those things. And patience in the process also is important, because when we stay the course, then we're rewarded, so to speak. So I really thought that was cool, because we were doing the double session, or kind of the makeup session, and the experience in the session for the person was completely different. I mean, they were under, but kind of the information that they received was completely different, but it was all relevant. And again, they received answers to all of the questions that they asked. Actually, some of the answers were much better the second time around than the first time. So again, it's better that we came back around. But the lesson of timing and being patient and not forcing and just allowing things to unfold as they are meant to is just very, very loud in this instance. So I wanted to share that, because if there's something that you really, really, really want to happen and it hasn't happened yet, maybe there's a reason. I once heard, I think it was Kerry Washington, and this is at the time where the show Scandal was really popular. I listened to her on an interview, and she gave a really good piece of advice where she talked about kind of the dreams and the things that she had in her life. And one of the things she said was about things happening. And when we ask and we dream and we write our goals down and we say our affirmations and we intend and all of those things, like we're seemingly doing all of the right things, and it doesn't happen. We get the yes, and then it doesn't happen the way that it's supposed to. She said something to the effect of there are three possible answers. The first is yes. So yes, you can have this thing. So kind of the asking God, asking the universe, yes, you can have this thing, or yes, it is the right time for this thing. No, it is not the right time for this thing, or no, this is not the right thing for you. And then there's yes and. So yes, but it's not the right time. Yes and keep going. So yes, no, and then yes but, or yes and. And I like to think of it yes and instead of yes but, because yes and feels more expansive. So yes and keep going. Yes and the timing is not quite right. Hearing her say that, again, made me reflect, because that's what I do. But it felt more comfortable and reaffirming that when we're asking for things and it isn't quite provided in the way or the time that we think it should, there's a reason for that. So I invite you to think about what you're aiming for in your life, the goals, the relationships, the whatever, and think about the timing if you're forcing something. If not, that's great. But if there is some efforting and some forcing going on, what is the reason for that? And what would happen if you just surrendered to the process? So that is my lesson from my most recent QHHT session. I hope that was insightful. I hope that helped with something. Let me know if it does.